Part 2. Images of the Masculine Warrior. Chapter 3. The Killer Ape. Shortly after the children of Cleveland Elementary School in Stockton, California, throng into the playground for a midday recess, a man ritually attired in army fatigues opens fire with an AK-47 assault rifle. He targets the children of recent Southeast Asian immigrants, who he believes have taken jobs away from men like himself. Not a veteran himself, he is fueled by the hatred his veteran friends have for the, quote, gooks. He kills 5 children and wounds 30 others. He is Patrick Purdy, an alcoholic drifter who plays with toy soldiers and imagines himself a guerrilla fighter. In an act of vindictive triumph, he finally shoots himself. A former employee charges into the offices of Standard Gravure in Louisville, Kentucky, and combs 3 floors of the building with bullets from another AK-47. In the midst of the carnage, he encounters an old friend and says, "Hi, John. I told them I'd be back." After killing 7 of his former coworkers and wounding 13, Joseph Westbecker points his gun at his own temple and pulls the trigger. These stories and others like them are all too familiar. Some of us cry out against the semi-automatic weapon. Some look for psychiatric symptoms. Some of us shake our fist at the supposedly inherent violence of the male animal. All of us cry out against the long nightmare of human history. To date, primarily a history of the violence of men against other human beings, other species, and increasingly against the ecosystem as a whole. Those men who act out their inner conflicts in assaults on school children, in stockpiling nuclear weapons, in acts of terrorism, in holy wars, or even in toxic waste dumping, are really boys pretending to be men. They are trying, with brutal desperation, to find and affirm their masculinity, but they have no idea how to do either. We have had a long history of immature shadow warriors. Possessed by a bloodthirst, maddened by rage, these boys seek absolute power over others. Their destructiveness attacks both themselves and others. Like a plague, their fury can sweep across entire continents. And like a plague, the fury ends by destroying its host. Those who live by the sword die by the sword. From the ancient Assyrians who flayed men alive for sport, to the GIs in Vietnam who took Viet Cong penises for trophies, the shadow warrior has terrorized the world for centuries. Understandably, everyone fears power. We fear it in others, and we fear it in ourselves. If possessed by the aggressive might of the warrior, we believe we will endanger the lives of our fellow human beings, and put at risk the well-being of the entire planet. And yet, there are examples of big city cops who use deadly force against violent criminals in an expression of controlled aggression, which protects the weak from the strong. There are wars waged to stop the insane and barbarous aspirations of ego-inflated madmen. There are just revolutions waged by the oppressed against their oppressors. It's hard to remember that ultimately Martin Luther King Jr.'s peace protest alone did not secure the freedom to vote for Southern blacks. Federal troops did. Apparently, there is such a thing as might for right. In African Genesis, Robert Ardrey's thesis is that there is a killer ape inside us, inherited from our distant primate ancestors. According to Ardrey, this instinctual killer was instrumental in assuring the survival of our species in the days when our ancestors had to contend against a number of predators and perhaps competing hominid species. While Ardrey's picture of the killer ape may be a bit simplistic, as well as more than a little dismal, it is difficult to argue against the probability that our capacity for violence has had a major impact on the evolution of our species and has helped propel us to extraordinary success in the competition for life with other organisms. The problem today is how to turn what was once a species-enhancing instinct into a beneficial rather than an endangering dynamic. Some people choose not to believe human aggressiveness is innate. Others prefer to assign aggression exclusively to the male of the species. Various schemes have been proposed for eliminating the killer ape by these critics of so-called masculine aggressiveness. One would attempt to do away with aggression by a social engineering program allowing boys to express only the so-called feminine virtues. Another would involve a pervasive drug regimen to inhibit aggression-inducing hormones like testosterone. The fact is that aggressiveness is an innate characteristic of our species. In the course of his work, the psychologist Anthony Stevens has studied the basis of the archetypes in biochemistry and brain structure. Specific neurological structures, primarily the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, both found in the midbrain, do give rise to aggressive impulses. Other studies link various naturally produced chemicals, especially testosterone, to heightened levels of aggression. Agents such as the norepinephrine secreted by the adrenal glands may also be involved. The archetypes are real dynamic structures and are not the dismissible fantasy figures some misinterpreters of Jung have made them out to be. Like the deep linguistic structures Noam Chomsky has identified, the archetypes shape our behaviors at such a fundamental level that we are often unconscious of their presence. And they are compulsive. A man possessed by one archetype or another is compelled to act out certain scripts, whatever his feeling of free will. An archetype is looking for a place to incarnate, and only a healthy ego can channel archetypal energies without having them take over. Women have essentially the same neurological structures as men. The feminine hypothalamus and pituitary gland are the same rage center that they are for men. Testosterone is present too in women, though in much lower concentrations. During the course of a woman's menstrual cycle, furthermore, the drop in the production of the ovarian hormone estradiol and other hormones often produces violent and aggressive behavior. An argument, any argument that there is no physical mechanism for aggression in women is simply false. Women have been known to attack men and other women with a frenzy equal to that of men. Among counselors and school officials who deal on a daily basis with inner city teens, it is common knowledge that teenage girls are responsible for the many of the violent incidents in and around the schools. There is a rising tide of delinquent teenage girls convicted of the most brutal of crimes, including armed robbery and murder. The fantasy that the hard edge of male business management would be softened by the entry of women into the ranks has been belied by experiences with tyrannical and abusive female executives. And many tell us that most of the emotional or even physical brutality they suffered in school was administered by nuns or other female teachers. Those who would eliminate aggressiveness by social engineering are pursuing a delusory goal. As Alice Miller and other developmental psychologists have demonstrated, infantile rage is to a significant degree a product of inadequate or actively hostile parenting. When a child's primary narcissism and grandiosity are abruptly, repeatedly, or catastrophically challenged, a secondary narcissism will form in response. That secondary narcissism carries the rage. When this rage isn't transformed or modulated by subsequent life experience, it expresses itself through amazingly brutal behaviors, even in what should be the adult stages of life. The inner child manipulates the adult's feelings and life circumstances to conform to the trauma rage response scenario of infancy. In For Your Own Good, Miller compares the physical and emotional environment of young Hitler to the physical and psychological conditions of Nazi Germany as a whole, and of the concentration camps in particular. The match is a perfect one. In her view, Adolf Hitler reenacted his childhood rage and trauma through repetition compulsion on the stage of the world. He was saying, essentially, look, this is what was done to me. Presumably, if his German contemporaries had had more self-affirming childhoods, their desire to follow him would not have been so great. It bears noting that aggressive behavior is not synonymous with rage or violence. Rage and violence are expressions of overstimulated aggression. Aggressiveness, however, is necessary to the organism's struggle for life and for the development of the self. Where threats to life or self structures mount, so does the intensity of aggression in response, until the energy reaches a breaking point. After the break, the personality may be possessed by a temporary insanity. Many human beings, both male and female, are caught in the grip of an insufficiently consolidated ego structure. One overly susceptible to upwellings of infantile rage. Parental abuse is again a major culprit behind this susceptibility. As the British psychiatrist Anthony Storr points out in his book, Human Destructiveness, if a person's need to affirm himself or herself through legitimate aggressiveness is thwarted, to the degree that it is thwarted, violence, fueled by narcissistic rage, often becomes the last resort. Storr adds to the perspective of developmental psychology the understanding that a person's ethnic and class origins also play a factor. The resort to violence is often seen among young men who have no chance to be self-affirming in the dominant culture. Aggression is an aspect of forceful self-expression, and as such, it is a natural, healthy, and vital part of being human. Babies exhibit natural aggressiveness when they kick and scream in order to have their needs met. Toddlers need natural aggression to stay undaunted in their attempts to walk, no matter how many times they may fall. Young boys seem to be impelled by their natural aggressiveness to venture farther and more frequently from the mother's lap than young girls of the same age. Aggression is behind the natural enthusiasm both sexes show in reaching for objects parents and other caregivers have repeatedly placed off limits. Can social engineering of the infant's early environment eliminate aggression? No. At best, it may minimize aggression's rageful expression. At worst, it may force rage underground if the child is taught, explicitly or implicitly, that aggressive displays are unwanted. The child then represses the rage to please the parent. In this case, the child, and later the adult, may appear to be overly passive, lackluster, and depressed. If the rage is ever given vent, it will actually be intensified by the years of repression. It seems unlikely then that socializing aggression away will have any desirable effect. But if socialization is limited to providing a positive channel for aggression, it might then be useful. Only the most radical behaviorists do not believe in some innate form of human nature. Although Freudians, and the various schools descended from the Freudian milieu, have tended to emphasize the importance of the early environment over innate psychological structures in determining human behaviors, even these schools of thought have made provision for heritable psychological structures that shape human aggressiveness. Alfred Adler assumed the existence of what he called the power drive. Erik Erikson wrote of configurations found in a psychological ground plan that includes for boys an intrusive mode. For Freud, the id is a vast reservoir of unsocialized aggressive wishes. The most famous of these is a boy's Oedipal wish to kill his father and marry his mother. Jungians have elaborated the archetypal dynamic within the unconscious psyche. Through an aggressive forward thrusting, these dynamics move the personality into progressively higher states of psychological integration. According to these psychologies, then, aggression is not expungible. Whether it manifests in a pathological form or not depends upon the severity of childhood trauma and the degree of success of subsequent intervention. The use of drugs to minimize aggression and anxiety can be relatively effective. The results of such minor tranquilizers as diazepam, lorazepam, a major tranquilizer like chlorpromazine, and the mood stabilizer lithium carbonate are well documented. Of course, no responsible psychiatrist advocates widespread use of these drugs. All mood-altering drugs have undesirable, sometimes unforeseeable, side effects and are prescribed only for particular cases of psychological dysfunction. Since human aggression does seem to be innate, it makes no sense to try to eliminate it either through social engineering or drug therapy. It seems aggression stems from the interaction of genetically inherited archetypal dynamics, neurological structures, and chemical agents with forces in the environment. All we can do is modulate its expression and its intensity. If there is a question that those who want to do away with If there is a question that those who want to do away with aggression would rather not face, probably it would be whether aggressive human behaviors serve any healthy, generative function. We believe that the answer is yes. Aggression would never have retained such a prominent place in the human self unless it had an important contribution to make to the advancement of our species. Aggressiveness gives rise to an impulse to act in order to secure the resources an organism and its community need to survive and flourish. Nature has especially equipped men to carry out the essential aggressive tasks of our species. The equipment includes a characteristically specialized male brain, our highly developed upper body musculature, our greater size, and the added impulse of testosterone. Young males are flooded with 20 times the testosterone that young females experience. Where the masculine aggressive drives once served in our primate past to fight off predators and defend females and offspring, now they serve as a primary impetus toward an increasingly fuller expression of the creative potentials of our species. It is this generative aspect of the warrior energy we will explore in this book, along with his destructive potentials. When a nation becomes mobilized for war, the warrior raises the aggressive energy that inspires a whole people. In the presence of the archetypal warrior, the feeling is that something momentous is about to happen. There is an upwelling of group pride and aspiration, and a sense of triumphal forward movement. Once the necessary emotional buttons are pushed, we join ranks and march lockstep as one mighty collective human being, carrying the flags that designate our group identity. Many men look back to the days of war with an intense longing. They miss a time in their lives when they felt on the edge, intensely alive, a time when life and love walked hand in hand with death and destruction. There's a fundamental mystery here. Why are men never so motivated to go beyond their individual ego concerns as when they are going to war? What is it about war that men are so much in love with? Whether in the guise of Ramses II swinging his mace over the rearing heads of his enemies, Douglas MacArthur striding ashore in the Philippines, or Arnold Schwarzenegger blazing a path of righteous destruction through a corrupt world, the archetypal warrior has always gripped our imaginations. He has always quickened our heartbeats and stirred us to action. He awakens us and makes us long to fight life's battles. He makes us eager for challenges. Despite our post-Cold War age, we still spend billions annually on war. And think of the millions we spend on war movies. Add to this the billions we spend on athletic contests, tamed and ritualized substitutes for war, and the pervasive energy of the warrior becomes apparent. Archaeological evidence from the earliest of human eras shows a fascination with the hunter, a specialized face of the warrior, whose aggressive action is directed against game animals. We find beautifully executed spear points and axe blades. Many of these spear points are far too large to have been utilitarian. The mythologist Joseph Campbell notes that these symbols of warrior-hunter energy are some of the earliest evidence we have of a sophisticated aesthetic development and a spiritual dimension on the part of our ancestors. Certain caves in central and southern France appear to have been dedicated by Cro-Magnon man to the mysteries of the hunter. Deep in the bowels of the earth, in secret recesses and vast underground chambers, beautifully rendered game animals are depicted along with the figures of shamans and hunters. Scholars believe these caves were used during the initiation of boys into manhood, and also for the practice of a kind of magic designed to make the animal whose image was captured submit to the will of its hunters. If these magic ceremonies were anything like primitive hunting rituals, some people still practice, the animals were probably experienced as brothers and sisters. The belief would have been that animals would only be lured onto the hunter's spear after prayer and supplication. The hunter would have asked the animals forgiveness and then explained why their flesh was so important to his people. He would finally have asked the animals to reincarnate themselves in order to return with the food, clothing, implements, and other benefits only they had the power to confer. In these ceremonies, Cro-Magnon man very likely celebrated the mystical symbiotic union of man and beast, just as the poetry and art of his descendants would thousands of years later. Perhaps Cro-Magnon families lived in the large ventilated antechambers near the cave entrance. Long, narrow tunnels led from these chambers into the deep interior galleries. Many of these tunnels were, and are, so narrow the only way to get through them is on hands and knees. Shrouded in inky blackness, ancient handheld lamps must have thrown a flickering light over the rough rock walls of these chambers, making them seem alive with animal vitality. Imagine the initiation rituals that may have taken place in these primeval cave sanctuaries. Boys are forcibly taken away from the realm of the mothers in the antechambers and led down long tunnels symbolic of the birth canal. Their release into the inner womb of Mother Earth, into some deep, nearly inaccessible gallery, signifies their gestation into the interior realm of masculinity. Here older men impart to the boys the myths of the hunter, the myths of creation, the myths of the tribe and tribal technology. The central mystery of their traumatic experience is probably the revelation of the reality of their own deaths. Almost certainly, the boys are terrified by this dramatization of the death of their childhood and the birth of manhood. Now, too, is the time for the boys to learn what later cultures will call the mystery of the sword, the symbol of phallic might that cuts both ways, making life for one by causing the death of another. Life feeds on itself, they are taught, and one life sacrifices itself for another. The many figurines of fecund goddesses found in these caves probably are used to teach the boys about sexuality, its pleasures, and its procreative intent. After gestating in this masculine womb, the boys are finally released into the daylight world, reborn as men. Through these masculine rites of passage, Cro-Magnon boys are turned into generative men under the guise of the hunter. Evidently, the warrior has been with us for a long time. He is here to stay. We cannot wish him away. We should not alter our genetic code to erase all trace of him. We cannot neutralize him through social engineering, and if we tranquilize him, we suffer a variety of attendant consequences. From the point of view of a depth psychologist, the question is not how to get rid of him. The questions are, how can we harness his aggressive potential for creative action? How can we avoid the brutal excesses of the shadow warrior? How can we wed might with right and power with goodness? There are developmental and societal reasons why males of our species need a full complement of legitimate aggressiveness. Since boys must follow a different route than girls in their developmental journeys and dissociate from their mothers both as individuals and as males, a boy's maturation process is particularly gut-wrenching. A unique gender characteristic loneliness may set in when, at a certain point in the process, a boy finds himself in a wasteland midway between the feminine mode of relating he learned with his mother and the unknown alien mode he needs to learn from men. At this point, it is essential that a nurturing older man step in to alleviate this profound loneliness. Boys can learn from such men how to relate to feminine energy from a position of strength and confidence, from the stance of a secure masculine identity. Even if all goes well, a separation from the mother is difficult. The separation from the realm of the mothers and the carefree dependency and passivity a mother offers, followed by the assuming of a forced identity of masculine prerogatives and responsibilities, has at its aim a masculine identity intimately involved with the world through traditional protector, provider, and procreator roles. The problem of our culture is that so many boys are abandoned by their fathers, specifically, and by older men in general at this critical juncture. Consequently, they feel inordinately susceptible to the passive allure of regressing to the protective feminine energies of the mother. Their choices are limited to living with an essentially feminine mode of relation, or an unbearable lifelong loneliness and isolation. There is widespread agreement among depth psychologists and psychoanalytic theorists concerning the role of the father in this context. If the father is not there, or the father is not assertive in moving in and claiming the son, the mother is put into a very bad position. Her son cannot help but experience her only as a tremendous source of power, and not as a human being. Through no fault of her own, the son has not been able to make the necessary connection to the masculine sphere that would help him separate from her without needing to kill her. A man with a weak or an abusive father often ends up with fantasies of killing his mother. A lot of very violent men have been failed by the men in their lives. Any examination of the crack epidemic in our society is currently facing will soon return to this. The young men and boys who are pushing and using the drug have simply not had contact with powerful, mature males. The only male power they see is manifested by the dealer who has the money to buy women and friends and the guns to kill them. Our society's astonishing impotence in the face of this and other epidemics that afflict young males stems from our inability to initiate our men into a sense of their proper responsibilities and power. The ancient warrior-hunter cultures had this institutionally incorporated advantage over us. Their men were available to assist boys with their traumatic developmental tasks. With so little thought now given to what it means to be a man, and with women so far ahead of us of late in their work on innate feminine potentials, we face some particularly daunting problems in our culture. Men clearly need help coming into their own. Women would like to give their men this help. Increasingly, though, they are intuiting that there are many things they cannot do, that much of the help can come only from other men. This can be a frustrating truth for both sexes to face. Andrew Bard Schmuckler argues that men, more than women, are the victims of what he calls the mentality of scarcity. This he defines as the belief that there is never enough good to go around, and therefore that individuals and groups must compete for what little there is. Through their instinctual protector and provider roles, men have been called upon to do most of the competing, often through warfare. Since their capacity to secure the good for their dependents often hangs upon these competitive successes, men are perpetually called upon to put their souls as well as their bodies to the test. A success is a triumph, but a failure brings, if not physical injury or death, total humiliation. Women have fared about the same, Schmuckler argues. Whether or not men succeed in protecting them from the depredations of other men, they have remained in relatively a helpless and vulnerable position, tied to the traditional physical and psychological state of affairs. Men face the risk of being unmanned at any time. What is true of warfare is also true of the workplace. Men compete with other men for income and status, risking not physical injury or death, at least not in direct ways, but humiliation and dishonor. Men must steer a course between the tendency to lie down and give up and the tendency to become sadistic and abusive. That is the bad news. The good news is that the warrior, properly accessed, can do a great deal to empower us to live our lives, make our worlds, and protect, provide, and create a just order on a perilous planet. And the warrior is within every man. We are all potentially capable of doing all these things.